soon. With me here in the Melbourne studio now, Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Tim, thanks for your time. As I mentioned...
Sorry, Kieran, we can't go past it. I need to congratulate you on your Logie. It's wonderful to be on Logie winning television.
Sky News' first ever Logie. It was great.
Yeah,
it was fantastic with the team and David Spears and the rest of the crew last night. Was fantastic. Paul Murray and Peter Credlin. So it was very enjoyable, but I was well behaved and I'm very sharp this morning, nice and fresh. So we saw Marine Le Pen. She's made the final runoff in France, and as I just discussed with David, in this country the number's not as high, but still. On the right of the spectrum, Pauline Hanson's One Nation holding on to 10% of the vote in the news poll.
Well, if you look at the French election, it's never a good guide for what's happening in Australian politics. French election, they have one big election where everybody votes how they say with their heart, then they go and have a runoff where people vote with their head. We just do it all in one election because we have a preferential system. So there's not much to take from it. If you judge it today, Macron's going to smash it in and I think beat Le Pen quite comfortably. And that just shows you again that there is no political benefit running off to the far right. You can't just go out and speak just to those who are loudest and noisiest. You need to focus always on the mainstream and govern from your values through the mainstream. And that's the way to beat Pauline Hanson, particularly when you've got her going out there and saying ridiculous things on vaccinations, loving Vladimir Putin, and just about everything ridiculous in between.
Do you feel encouraged? We said the move's not a huge move in this poll, but at least it's in the right direction. You'd prefer that to the other.
Polls come, polls go. It's about trends and long-term trends that matter, and of course the poll on voting day. But of course you always look at signs, and one of the clear things is that the Prime Minister has a substantially higher approval than the opposition leader. That's the one thing we do know, and that's been consistent since the day that he basically took over as Prime Minister. And so we have to realise that the public wants the Prime Minister and the government to do well, and that's what I'm focused on.
And now the budget, that's the focus. We're seeing today some polling by the JWS organisation published in the AFR today. Priorities of voters. Not surprising, really, that Medicare, health at the top, economic growth is there as well. Further down the list, housing affordability. Is this as you'd expect it in terms of voter priorities?
Well, all of them are important, and when you're given a list, you pick the ones that matter directly to you most of the time. One of the things that, if you look at the French election, this is where I think we can get some analysis. If you look at the challenges, Macron has been mobilising a lot of younger people, and Le Pen, I think, has particularly been appealing to a lot of less well-off people and people looking for greater security, particularly older voters. And what we know is we've got a huge generational divide within Australian society today, and particularly older voters are very concerned about health and making sure that they can have security in a latter stage of their life. And those are exactly the sorts of issues that we're getting back through my constituency, across constituencies across the country, is that health matters, but young people also want opportunity and they want to be able to buy their first home.
One of the complexities with that issue, though, obviously booming in this city of Melbourne, in Sydney as well, and other parts of the country, but not so much in regional areas, in WA and in Adelaide as well, and in parts of Queensland. The property prices aren't what they are in these other cities. So it's a paradox that the government needs to manage in this budget.
Well, it's not really a paradox. It's one of the issues that's very important, which is why at the centre of voters' concerns is economic growth.
But you've got the paradox to the extent that if you lifted rates, for example, it would hurt, it would damage, smash cities like Adelaide, whereas it might put a lid on those markets here in Sydney.
Well, Kieran, you know we don't decide interest rates, the RBA decides interest rates. But the key thing is that people want economic growth, and they want economic growth because that creates jobs. Jobs mean people can afford to pay for their mortgages. It means that they can go on and build opportunities for their family and themselves. And particularly economic growth needs to occur outside of Melbourne and Sydney. It needs to be shared, or opportunities to exist around the whole of Australia. That's how we'll get opportunities, rising house prices, and people seeing the opportunities of moving out of just Melbourne and Sydney and going to parts of Queensland and regional centres.
It's been a very robust, at times public debate within the government about what to do on this issue of housing affordability. The relevant junior minister, Michael Sukkar, again last night, would not endorse the view of Malcolm Turnbull that it's a fundamentally bad idea to tap into super for deposits. He clearly is not of that view. Malcolm Turnbull is, as is Finance Minister Cormann, who basically killed off this issue last Friday on this program, but still others in the government making the case for it.
But I've been quite clear I'm sceptical of this proposal, highly sceptical, unless somebody can show me some substantial modelling which shows somehow that increasing demand in a system that's already constrained with supply is going to somehow lower house prices. I don't get it. You know, in an issue as complex as housing affordability, people are going to be looking at lots of different options. You know what, Kieran? That's a good thing. You actually want government to consider all available opportunities, because in the end, our focus has to be about how to get young people to have their pathway and their first opportunity, not just to buy a house, but to create that sense of security you need to form a family and go on and live as a productive life.
I mentioned Michael Sukkar. He was on the Carvelis program last night, asked about the contribution of Tony Abbott. Yesterday, Peter Dutton said there needs to be respect both ways, both to the former leader, but him to the party. This is what Michael Sukkar said in relation to that.
I don't think that anything this week distracted the government from what we need to do. I think every member of our team shows the due deference and respect to the Prime Minister that they should.
But is Tony Abbott?
Well, I think that's for others to
I'm asking
assess.
you. Others will assess, but what do you think?
I'm not a commentator. I think, absolutely, I do. I absolutely think he is showing respect to the whole party. But again, it's not really for me to commentate.
Michael Sukkar there on the Carvelis program. Tim Wilson, your reflection on where things are right now, because while you look at the polling, things are close, and the primary vote 36, Labor's at 35. It's not a healthy spot for them to be, but when you've got this fundamental structural problem within the government of a former leader in the parliament still doing regular interviews, criticising, that's not helpful to Mr Turnbull's cause.
Well, I agree with Peter Dutton. I mean, when it comes down to it, we have to show healthy respect for everybody within the coalition ranks and within the parliamentary ranks. But I think it's quite clear that we have to make sure that we're all swimming in the same direction. We're all supporting the Prime Minister and the government. People are entitled to their views and to offer constructive dialogue as is appropriate, but we should all be swimming in the same direction, and that's where all backbenchers, including myself, should be focusing their energies, because the choice isn't between differing leaders at the next election of the Liberal Party. The choice in the next election will be between Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten, and I can sure as hell tell you that nothing scares me more than Bill Shorten being Prime Minister.
Tim Wilson, appreciate your time. Nice to be in Melbourne with you.
It's good to have you here.
Thanks. Talk